Welcome to Ahead of the Game, a podcast brought to you by the Digital Marketing Institute. This episode is a big Q&A where we explore an area of marketing through a leading industry expert. I'm your host, Will Francis, and in this episode, we'll be taking a deep dive into SEO, or search engine optimization. It's quite simply the business of getting a website ranked on search engine results pages. But behind the scenes, it's far from simple and one of the most misunderstood areas of digital marketing. To tell us how it really works and give us an insight into what an SEO expert actually does, we have Joe Williams, who teaches on this very subject at Tribe SEO. Joe's been an SEO for over 15 years, consulting for and training brands large and small, from The Guardian, Cosmopolitan and Sky, through to growth stage startups. He says he's on a mission to make SEO easy, fun and profitable. Welcome to the podcast, Joe.
Hi, Will. I'm very pleased to be here.
I'm very intrigued about what you do. You know, I'm a social and content marketer, and I think I know, I think I've got a broad understanding of SEO, but I'm well aware that there's a lot I don't know. So my job over the next hour or so is to try and extract all the useful information in your head, because I think there's a lot of it. Let's get straight into it. Tell me where you think SEO is today, and where's it been? What kind of journey has it been on, and how has it changed in the course of your career?
Okay, well, I've been an SEO for around 15 years, and to start with, it used to be this sort of technical thing. People would, be looking to hire SEOs, and quite often a website would have a lot of technical issues, and they needed to be fixed. And after that, you start to think about building your content. So I think there's been a little bit of a shift where 15 years ago, people would look for skill sets like myself at the time, which was perhaps a little bit more technical. And the shift is kind of moving more into content and more into the promotion of content as well. So I think SEO is obviously evolving. Google's algorithm is evolving. And it's more about, Google has always said, focus on the user and all else will follow. And no one really took notice on that too much, because you could game the system, and lots of people did game the system. But I think with artificial intelligence, we're getting closer to the connection of what Google says you should do, and that's focus on the user.
Right. And so is it it seems to me it's a much broader field, because, you look at things like Google Page Speed Insights, and so now I've got to be a UX expert and understand that across lots of different devices, but particularly kind of mobile first. There's all those other considerations now, because Google's getting better at understanding the quality and relevance of content. So have you had to kind of pick up a lot of new skills along the way?
I definitely say so. I think, SEO used to kind of be this silo that sat below marketing, whereas now it's kind of part of marketing. So, site speed, for example, that kind of does come back to focusing on the user. It's having a good user experience. And being an SEO doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be, have the technical knowledge of a web developer to make sure your website is loading quick.
You just need to be able to diagnose it and kind of...
Exactly. You need to know what the benchmarks are, what's acceptable time, what's not acceptable, and just have a little bit more advanced knowledge than perhaps your average person that looks after a website, to just encourage your web developer to make the changes that needs to happen in that context, in a more technical space.
So I suppose modern SEO is basically 3 disciplines.
Yes.
Essentially.
Yes. In fact, not just I would, if I'm thinking of the same three. I'll let you go.
I think it's content, technical, and what's the other one?
We've got content, technical, and links. We sometimes say on page, which is content, off page, which is links, and then the technical's the same. And the strange thing is in the time that I've been in SEO, those 3 core areas of SEO existed back 15, 20 years ago. So they haven't changed. They're kind of like the core principles to SEO. What has changed is that search engines have got smarter in understanding what's genuinely good content that helps the user and is relevant, and what's less good, less quality content, and perhaps is actually trying to game the system and manipulate the system. So the broad principles are still the same, which I quite like, because it kind of means we don't have to change our strategy on a day-to-day basis. But what is happening is there's some nuances that are changing, and Google built itself in terms of being the most popular search engine based on its links algorithm. So PageRank is all about how reputation flows across the internet and between web pages. And prior to that, it used to be very much to do with keywords and content and a few technical things, but it was in isolation. It wasn't seeing how web pages are connected together. And I think it was 1998 Google was released, and by 2001 it was pretty much the most popular search engine. And that was predominantly because of its PageRank algorithm that was able to provide better results. And that PageRank algorithm was quite dominant for a number of years, 10 plus years, as the driving factor, in my opinion, in how Google decided what results to show the user. But that's, over the last particularly 6 years since Google updated its main algorithm to name it as Hummingbird, there's been a shift, and the links are still important, still very important, but there's a shift more between content and having a really good user experience.
That's really fascinating. I have to admit, I definitely keyword stuffed in the late 90s with my first website.
I think we all did a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, but okay. And so you actually used the term search engines just there. I mean, we all imagine that SEOs just think about Google. Do you actually consider other search engines?
I think it depends on the context, but I think for most people, I quite often use Google and a search engine interchangeable.
Same here.
And for most countries in the world, it's around 90% of people use Google as their as a search engine. Certainly in the UK, in the US, I think we've got exceptions with. Like South Korea, we've got exceptions with China and Russia, but outside of those countries, it's usually Google is the main search engine. And my kind of take on it is, even when we look at Bing and Yahoo, it's what works well for Google kind of works well broadly for Bing and Yahoo as well, and other search engines. There are obviously subtle differences, but I think as a general rule, that's kind of my take on it. Now, obviously, there's the kind of non-traditional search engines, with Echo and Alexa kind of on the rise. But I think predominantly, I think most people are talking about Google when they're talking about search engine optimization.
And just a small note on that, how do you regard search engines, alternative search engines like DuckDuckGo, that are more privacy focused and have a more it seems to be a more user-centric value to their business. Is that a thing we should be considering? Or
I like DuckDuckGo, and I like to see new search engines being given a go. I would say it's the reality is, from a commercial perspective, if you're a business, it's more of a let's keep a watcher on it and see what happens. And if you take your private, if you're a user and you prefer to use DuckDuckGo for privacy reasons, then that's cool, But I think from a commercial perspective, I don't know what the latest numbers are for DuckDuckGo, but my guess would be it would be like maybe 0.5% or less potentially.
I would say.
So yeah, it depends on your outlook really, but I think in terms of having a focus, I would kind of focus on Google first, and then just see how that cascades with some of the smaller search engines as well.
Yeah. And thinking more broadly in terms of marketing, how does SEO kind of intersect and interact with other trending disciplines, particularly thinking about social media and content marketing?
Yeah. So I think today's sort of modern marketer should be linking those three disciplines together. So, the whole idea with search engine optimization, if we think about the links side of things, This is all about making your website more reputable, building the social proof of your web pages.
And do we know much about how much notice Google takes of social links? Do we know much about that?
We do. I mean, it's a little bit mixed in terms of what people what people's view is on it. But as a general feeling, my sort of take on social media links is the link that you get from a social media profile won't necessarily benefit you that much in terms of reputation being passed from an SEO perspective to your site. But the real benefit is the eyeballs. So if you're being shared on, say, Twitter, for example, by someone who's got a lot of followers, potentially some of those followers may be potential customers, but they may be potential journalists or bloggers. And then you can kind of get the more traditional links from other websites, which tend to have more of a benefit in terms of page rank and reputation. But interestingly, with the new kind of no follow announcement, which happened around a week or two ago, Google is changing its sort of tact a little bit in terms of how it treats no follow. So particularly with UGC, user generated content. So in the past, when we saw a no follow link on a web page, really what we were instructing search engines to do from an SEO perspective is not to pass reputation from one web page to another. It wasn't saying that it was a bad page that was being linked to, but it was just, if it was a blog comment, it was just saying to the search engines, this is a blog comment. We can't endorse what this commenter is saying. Likewise, if it was a paid link, it wasn't saying that the link it was linking to was bad. It was just saying that link, they were neutral in terms of endorsing it. So I think maybe there will be a bit of a shift where social media can play a bigger part in terms of search engines and reputation, because where links have been no followed in the past, what Google is saying now is rather than taking that as being really definitive and that no reputation will be passed, it's now looking at it as more of a hint at that perhaps reputation shouldn't be passed. But with Google's algorithm and artificial intelligence, it may say, well, we know a bit about this commenter on this blogger and they have a reputation, so perhaps we will pass some reputation through a no followed link.
That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I suppose there's some webmasters, as they used to be called, that would worry about that, worry that their instruction wasn't absolute, I suppose, but it's Google's product and we have to trust that they're keeping their search results as relevant as possible through AI and machine learning.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it is Google's rules. It's Google's algorithm. So I think we just need to kind of adapt and evolve. And I think that the reality is, even with this new no follow announcement by Google, I don't think it's going to change the state of play that much. And also, we don't really know how it's going to be treated until the dust settles. And that's quite a common thing in the SEO industry, is you'll see an announcement and you'll get quite a lot of SEO experts giving their commentary in terms of how this may be interpreted. But we don't tend to really know until, maybe a few months down the line. Maybe Google will have made a second or third announcement. And that's maybe one tip that I would have for people who are learning SEO is, don't always take what's on face value, within the week of an announcement. It's usually maybe some experts making predictions, which may or may not be true. And it's, it's personal interpretation. So it's just building your layer of knowledge over time, really, and then getting a collective view on what you think's happening.
And on that, how do you keep so in touch with the world of SEO? How do you kind of and how do you do that without spending all day reading blogs?
Okay, yeah. So a lot of SEOs are on Twitter. It seems to be the social media site where they're most active. And if you're and I think you can either be very active yourself where you're posting a lot on Twitter, and I think there's no getting around, you have to kind of spend time doing it. But if you want to take it more from a learning perspective, one thing that I do is I use a website called nuzzle.com. That's Nuzz. I think it's el.com.
It is. I love Nuzzle.
It's a great tool. And the nice thing is I follow quite a lot of people on Twitter, But the reality is, there's only a select few or maybe around 100 that I actually genuinely think these guys are really sort of knowledgeable around SEO. I want to stay up to date with what they're talking about, what they're sharing. So I submit a Twitter list to Nuzzle. And then what that means is I can then, at any time, I can just log on to Nuzzle rather than social media. I can see the most recent posts that people I trust are sharing, or I just get an email summary around 4:00 every day. And I think what that allows me to do is it's like you can easily you can get very distracted on social media. So it feels like I'm staying in touch with people that I trust without necessarily spending too much time. And what's quite good is you get when you see an article, the most shared article by your friends, it's rated by how many shares they've had. So they'll sort of come more predominantly, and you can actually start to see pictures of the people who have shared it.
And you see their commentary. I find that really useful, because when I see one of the top shared pieces of content on Nuzzle, what I also want to know is what does the community think about that? Why are they sharing that? Are they saying that, because they could be sharing it as going, oh my God, this is a load of rubbish. Yeah. Or they could be sharing it in a positive way. So I think that's one of the really good strengths of Nuzzle. You get a very quick hot take on what's being shared, but what people think about it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's a great tool to check out. It's also, I think they've got a premium version, but I just use the free version. So
I'm far too cheap to pay for the premium version.
Yeah,
I am
No,
personally.
me too. So definitely worth checking out that one.
Okay, so let's talk about you. What I'm really interested in is, how did you get into SEO? But more specifically, at what point did you realize this is the thing I want to really focus my career on, and why? What was that kind of moment?
Okay, yeah. So I would probably guess it was around 2004, maybe. I'd finished university. I had been traveling. I had what I considered a really boring job in Swansea, and it was looking after an IT system for a property company, and it was very much to do with databases and SQL. Now, I know that's an ideal job for probably many people, but for me it just really wasn't very interesting. And it was quite a well-paid job. And then after 3 days, I just handed my notice in, and I was just like, I've had enough. I'm going to find something that I'm genuinely interested in. And just out of uni, I was still living with my parents, and I told my parents I was going to start an online business. And I think they were quite skeptical, and they asked my older brothers whether they thought it was a good idea. But this is around 2004.
And you came out of uni quite tech savvy, because you'd done computational what was it you did?
It's computing informatics.
That's right.
So
yeah.
Strangely, we didn't talk very much about SEO in that degree, and it was only a small amount of websites, but it was probably quite a good background to be able to start and build a website. And I think WordPress was out at that stage, but I hadn't heard of it, so I sort of built it from scratch. And the website was called openinghours.net. I've since sold it, but it was just essentially, if you typed in Tesco's opening hours, or maybe your local supermarket opening hours, it was actually quite hard at the time to find the results either on Google or on the actual websites. So I created a site which basically collated all the opening hours for popular stores. And then once someone found the opening hours, there would be a little message below it, or a little box saying, hey, have you thought about buying this product online? Because at that stage, people were quite new to spending money online. And then I would get a little commission if they clicked on my link. It sent them to the store. And
Such a good idea.
And I might get like 2 or 3% commission, or it might be like, if they were a new customer, I might get like £20 or something like that. And I was like, I just remember I'd be getting up early, I'd be finishing quite late, and at the time you could make a small tweak to a web page. You'd wait for it to get crawled and indexed, maybe just change the alt text of an image on a page, and I was like, aha, I've climbed up a couple of places. And it's not quite the same now as making small changes and seeing immediately benefits. It takes a little bit longer normally. But I was like, right, I'm really interested in SEO, more so than building websites. I couldn't see myself, my full-time business being about opening hours of companies. It wasn't that interesting. But I was quite convinced that if I had stuck with that, I could see that it had the potential to make some good money. But I decided to move to London. I sold the website and just started working in SEO for a few different companies.
Right. Okay. And so you worked in an agency, did you? Is that where you kind of started out, or?
Yeah, I actually started out in a in-house. So it was for an online maths tuition website. And that was really interesting. So I was kind of more of a broader marketer, or really a broader digital marketer. So I was dealing with affiliates, I was doing Google Ads, I was doing SEO. But I think I realized that it was SEO that I was most interested in. But yeah, where I probably learned SEO with my steepest learning curve would have been a year or so later when I moved to an agency. And yeah, just really specialized in SEO.
And okay, and what sort of things did you try in those early days? And at what point did you realize you were quite good at it and had a knack at it? If you know what I mean.
I think when I realized I was quite good at it, I guess, if sometimes
Oh.
I want to keep it a little modest.
Yeah.
But no, I think what I found was, I think once you have a base level of SEO, it's a lot to do with common sense. And I don't mean necessarily common sense as we think of common sense generally. I think if you haven't got general common sense, you can still have SEO common sense. And then even though you've got a base level of SEO, you can start putting the pieces together and predicting how things will work. And in my early stage of SEO, I'd be like, well, I actually think it works like this. And then, maybe a few months later, I'd read a blog post by an SEO that I valued, and he would talk about this new idea, this new topic, and I was kind of thinking, hey, I had that idea, but of course I hadn't written about it publicly, but I just kind of felt like it kind of worked in terms of how my brain worked. It just seemed to make sense to me, SEO.
That's cool. That's very handy, because it is I think it will always be an in-demand. And like I said, I think it's quite misunderstood. I think it's a bit like being a drummer. I'm a drummer, right? So you're always in demand because it's not maybe the most popular route. Because it's not the easiest. It's hard. Yeah. Turning up and doing it is a lot harder than the guy who just turns up with a microphone or uses the venue's microphone and then. Anyway, that's the best analogy I've got. But so I think you'll always be in demand. But how do you feel then being a specialist in a world where I think specialism is thriving today? I mean, a lot of people talk about generalism as well, but I do think that more and more, agencies and freelancers are banding together around projects. Rather than everything being under the auspices of one agency. And I think we're all getting the benefit of that. But how do you fit into...
Well, yeah, I think this is a good point, generalism, specialist. And I was probably a generalist for the first year or two. And probably the majority of the last 15 years, I would say I've been more of a specialist. And an analogy that I would maybe give you is, let's imagine that you've been playing squash for, years and years, and there's a lot of, or maybe even tennis, and at a certain point you're getting to a very good level and you're getting problems with your knee, and you could go to your local doctor, your local GP, and you could say, hey, I've got this problem with my knee, I've been playing a lot of squash, a lot of tennis, can you help? Or you could find a knee specialist who specializes in sports injuries, and he has looked after and repaired a lot of damaged knees in his time. And there's a difference there between being an expert in something or more of a generalist. And I know that if I really valued my squash or my tennis, then I would probably want to see the knee specialist. That would kind of be my direction that I would go to. And I think as you start to develop your career in digital marketing, unless you sort of stay in-house and maybe the in-house company isn't that big, then
where you have to be general.
Where you have to be general. And to be honest, I think it's really good to start off general because you understand how all these other areas all talk and link together. Like my my Google Ads knowledge maybe isn't as relevant as, as an expert like now. In certain, it isn't as relevant. But at one stage, I would say that I was kind of very close to sort of being a specialist in Google Ads. It was kind of that and SEO. And the two are obviously very, very linked together. So if I didn't understand how Google Ads work, then I don't think I would be as strong as I am now in SEO. So yeah, I think it really depends. I think, if you want to be an expert, if you want people, if you want to be speaking about topics, then it helps to be a specialist. If you want to be noticed and recommended by people, some people call me Joe the SEO. I'm not Joe the digital marketer. And, it's kind of like someone, you're in a cafe or in a bar and it's like, oh, I've got this real problem with my SEO. It's like, you need to speak to Joe the SEO. And whereas if you're more of a generalist, it's kind of like, well, I'm sure I know someone who can help, but it'll come to me later. So
there's less of an obvious link between the problem and the solution, which is you, and there's also far more competition. As a generalist, or as a small agency that generalizes in digital marketing, I understand that you're just up against so many people. Whereas when you're in a specialism, and particularly SEO, I don't know if you agree, but I do think it's definitely one of the smaller specialisms, or it's one of the rarer specialisms rather. So I do think there's a lot to think about there in terms of kind of building a career. And another kind of decision I think people are always in the process of making in marketing is to whether to be freelance or whether to work in an agency or to work in-house at a brand. And you've done all three.
Yeah, no, I've done all three, and I've enjoyed all three. I mean, where did I start? I started in-house. So I started for a company, mentioned before, that did maths online tuition. The biggest difference for me between in-house and an agency, and I liked both, but in in-house you have more time to think about the one company and a bit more time to be more strategic, because you are the one goal is that business's success. And when that business becomes successful, you tend to share it as a team more. It's kind of like that. It's quite that connection. Whereas in an agency, you even when you do really good work and get good results for a client, you don't quite share the same experience of that win, because they don't want to celebrate too much with you, because they don't want you to become complacent. But equally though, we're in an agency, it is fast paced, and that it took me maybe a month or two to acclimatize to an agency, but with that fast pace you generally learn a lot quicker. You're dealing with a much broader sample of websites. You're learning from other people who are doing the same thing as you, whereas in-house it might just be you who's a digital marketer. So I enjoyed both, but I think after perhaps maybe 5 years of working in an agency, it just didn't feel right for me anymore. It kind of felt that it was hard to do right for my CEO who ran the agency, and it was hard to do right for the clients. And it felt like it just felt like it all came down to billable hours. It was like, at the end of the month, Joe, you need to do your 120 billable hours per month. And it would, at times it could be quite hard just juggling all the balls, and it was hard to give the care that you wanted to give to clients. So I think if you've got an agency that's really well managed, and they're profitable, so they're not worrying too much about billable hours, then you can kind of build a product, and you can kind of look after your clients well as well. But I think for a lot of smaller agencies, it's hard to be profitable, and it's hard to give the support that your clients really deserve. So I kind of felt like I'm gonna step out of this and start SEO training, which to start with was in-person SEO training.
And so I suppose being freelance and working for yourself, having those direct client relationships, even in the training sense, you just have that satisfaction of that you can deliver fully and properly for each client in a way that you're satisfied with and you feel good about.
Yeah, definitely, and that's a good point. With the freelance compared to say an agency, is it's sort of somewhere in the middle. You're kind of you can give the client the care and attention that you want to give them, but at the same time you are separated from them, so you can kind of work with other clients and learn as well. So I think all three are good, and I think you can stick to just being a freelance and raise your rates, and you build your reputation. And if you don't want to kind of maybe build a team or a company, then that's a good way to do it. So I think it depends on how you feel comfortable. Like,
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think for me, if anybody asked me early in their career or at any point thinking of going into marketing, what they should do, I think I would always suggest spending some time in an agency, going an intern in an agency, because like you say, it's very fast paced. You get to work on very different accounts often, unless it's a very big agency and you just get stuck on the one account. But even so, you're exposed to lots of different ways of working, people at lots of different stages in their careers. And I think it's a massive education. It was a huge education to me, but I do think that burnout has got to be, from what I've seen personally, burnout is far more common in agencies. And the amount of people I know that are ex-agency, like my Facebook friends and LinkedIn connections that I've worked in agencies with before, half of them are running kind of yoga studios in their local communities. And it's that classic trajectory of they work 20 hours a day at an agency and give everything for so long, and then they just completely burn out and have a massive career change. So, something to be aware of, but I think everybody should cut their teeth a little bit in that world.
Yeah, no, I share, a very similar viewpoint in that you learn a lot very quickly. And, the other thing as well is you learn from, not just from an SEO or digital marketing perspective, but you learn to become more commercial. You learn how other people pitch in meetings. And these, I was very lucky in the agency that I was at, that the CEO and the operations director I spent a lot of time with. So I learned a lot from a commercial perspective, which I think really helped.
That's a very good point. Especially if you're going to go freelance, you have to become your own, head of new business, head of accounts, and all that kind of stuff, the commercial side of it.
Yeah, totally agree with your viewpoint there, Will.
Okay, so thinking more about your life working for yourself. So as I said, you live in what sounds like an absolutely gorgeous kind of setting on the coast of Wales. But how do you go about managing a business? You're a new parent, you work from home. What are the main sort of challenges with that?
Yeah, just working from home is a challenge in itself. And, I think I started with a table in my bedroom, and then it moved into a table in the lounge, and then it moved into its own room. Wow. And now I've climbed up the kind of almost to the dream levels of working from home. I've got a cabin outside the house. Amazing. And that cabin overlooks the house, which overlooks a nice sea. So it's a lovely space to be in. And I've never had a problem with working from home in that, I kind of felt lonely or I needed more connection talking to people. But I think maybe where I sort of struggled with more was just being focused on what's the most important thing to do. And it wasn't so much that I would get distracted with social media so much. It was more to do with just being curious and learning new things, and my mind would kind of wander as I was investigating how to help a customer's problem. And I think sometimes you can wander too far, but on Try Best SEO on our About Us page, I think we've got 3 values. I better remember them now. One is curiosity, we've got clarity, and we've got courage. And I think the first one, curiosity, is important for SEO. If you're not curious around the subject, and I think this applies to all digital marketing disciplines, then I think you'll sort of struggle to be passionate about it, and you'll struggle to become a specialist. So I think it's a really good skill to have, to be curious, but at the same time you sort of need to nip it at the bud a little bit when at times, because you need to kind of get the work done that you need to do. So it's a bit of a balancing act.
I'm terrible at that. If I start a piece of research, before I know it, I'm on the Wikipedia page for, the history of kind of, the Dutch royal family, and I don't even know why I'm there. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And I get lost down rabbit holes very easily. Yeah. But like you, and I think a lot of marketers, we wander into marketing. We're drawn into digital marketing by our curiosity, because we start tinkering with the web. That was sounds like your experience, so certainly my experience in the late 90s. Just started tinkering with the web because there was this computer at home with the internet connected to it and no one was really using it much, and I see what I could make and break, and then before you know it, it's a skill that you've got, and you've wandered into digital marketing somehow. So I don't know if you can manufacture that curiosity, but I think it's good to be aware that a lot of people in marketing who really love it got into it because they started out just tinkering and seeing what would happen, and like you with the kind of changing small things and seeing if it could change what you see on a search results page.
I think we're all curious about something, like it's having an interest in something, and it's for SEO it's search engine optimization, but I think being curious and optimizing, whether it's SEO or Google Ads or social media, that's the key thing. Like, what is optimization? It's making something better, it's improving it, it's fine-tuning it. And I think that comes from curiosity. It's hard to optimize something just by following list after list after list. True. If you're not interested in that area. And I think it's a lesson that sometimes people learn quite late in their career, that they're actually in a career that they're just not interested in at all. And at times we change, of course we change, but I think it's good to allow time to be curious, but to not go too wide in your curiosity as well.
Indeed. And just to go back to something I meant to ask you about SEO specifically, actually, talking about curiosity, I'm curious as to, so in my world, I talk about social media and content marketing. I consult about it, I train about it, and I find that the same things come up again and again. People are making the same problems, almost to the point where I've sort of wondered, am I replaceable? Is there just a really well written blog post that could replace me? Because it's the same stuff that comes up time and again. And it's gone beyond being a potentially random pattern. This is definitely a widespread thing. People misunderstand the role of content, the value of content, and the approach they should take to it. And it's all very simple stuff. Similarly with social. And I find myself telling people the same 3 things or so. What are the things that you come across in sort of 90% of your briefs? Now, whether you consult or whether it's someone in one of your training sessions, asking about their business.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, are you replaceable? Like, I think it's.
I was sort of joking. I hope not.
No, but I think, like, it's a good point, because we're talking about training, we're talking about Digital Marketing Institute that offers a lot of training, and I think you can hear the same thing 7 times, but one person will say it in a way that resonates with you, and it will stick, and you'll learn that one important thing of the 3 things.
That makes me feel a lot better. Thanks. Yeah.
You're valuable, very valuable. But no, in terms of some of the things, the common things, the mistakes that people make, I would say one of the sort of, I wouldn't quite say it's a schoolboy error, because it's something that a lot of people do when they're new to SEO. But, you might research a page, and it might be quite a specific page, but you're researching keywords that are too general. So, it might be, let me have a think, it might be something like, you're looking at a luxury Botswana safari page, and it's very specifically about safaris in Botswana, but you're going a little bit too broad, where you might be, you might put in Botswana as the keyword. Botswana holidays probably should be in there, but it's all about really, if we think about what Google wants, it wants to understand the user intent of a keyword, and it wants to deliver a page that's super relevant to that keyword and that user intent. So that's the first one, is trying to go for keywords that are too general for the user intent of the page you're optimizing. Another one is getting too obsessed with, like, the the kind of trophy keyword in your industry. So, it could be, in the UK, we say ski holidays. In America, it's ski vacations. But, I remember working for they were a specialist self-driven ski holidays company in Europe. So it was quite niche. It was self-driven. It was lots of nice, quaint places you would stay in France predominantly. And, every meeting we would have, it would be, how are we getting on for ski holidays? That was the focus, that they wanted to rank for ski holidays. But the reality is they only had locations in Europe, predominantly France, and they were for self-driven ski holidays.
So they really wanted ski holidays.
Yeah, but if you think about it, focus on the user. Like if someone's typed in ski holidays, we don't know whether they want to go to Canada. We don't know if it's somewhere in the US. We don't know. So that really what would probably be the best in that case is kind of like being the Amazon of the ski industry, where you've got all the products covered pretty well. You're talking about topics within the ski holidays. That's probably the page that Google wants to pick. And also that keyword probably won't convert very well. If someone's typed in ski holidays and you are number 3, but you only offer holidays in France. Now, if it's a UK searcher, maybe 30% of searchers actually are interested in going into France. But probably of those 30%, most of them want to fly. Like I know I'm not the type that would probably want to, to get in the car for 10 or 12 hours. Now I know in America that's not a very long car journey, but for me that's a long car journey, and I would be tired starting my ski holiday. But that's a different type of person. So I think that's another thing to think about really is, yes, there's always going to be a trophy keyword in your industry, and it's not to discourage you from targeting that keyword, but it's to just kind of focus more on the specific, sometimes the mid, not so much a long tail specific keyword, not so much the fat head like ski holidays. It's somewhere in the middle, like it's to get a balance. So yeah, that's what one would be, going too general. The second one would be going for the trophy keyword. I think another one would be, I just don't feel ready to start. There's so much to do. I don't feel ready to start. And I think the reality is you just got to start before you feel ready. Like that's the way you generally get good at anything. It's kind of like if you want to, as a kid, if you want to go swimming, and you've never swam before, and you're 5 years old and you say, tell me all the theory before I jump in the pool. You're not going to get very far. You just got to jump in and start swimming. And I think it's definitely the same with SEO. You don't want to get too bogged down with everything. You just want to, get going and try and make progress. And then as you make small progress, you build up your knowledge and just keep going.
But that's the thing about SEO. It's hard and it's a bit daunting. And I suppose I'd be really interested to know, to what extent do you come across the attitude, well, we could sort our SEO out, but there are quicker wins here. We'd love to spend the money doing SEO, but actually we're going to spend it on content or social or PPC because I can see that work from tomorrow onwards.
Yeah, if we look at it from an ROI, return on investment perspective, it's easier to track Google ads or Facebook ads, and you do get quicker results. So I think if you're looking at it from a short-term perspective, maybe advertising is a more appealing route. But at the same time, advertising, the cost of advertising generally goes up as the market becomes more saturated. So you could be in a position where your advertising is working very, very well at the moment, but in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, maybe Facebook changes its algorithm. It's you're at the mercy of the rules of, in this case Facebook or your marketplace, how saturated it becomes. But with SEO, I think it is a longer term play, and the investment that you're putting in now might not be getting you the results tomorrow, but it will, if you do it right, it will get you the results in the future, but it also will get you results after that moment that you start to rank. So I think another myth that I hear is, I'm very pro, you should be, taking SEO seriously and you should be working on it every month. But the reality is, if you ranked in the top 3 positions for your most important keywords and actually did no SEO at all, I suspect, not that I would recommend doing this, but I suspect you'd probably get some, 6 months, you wouldn't notice a massive difference, maybe even a year. So there is this kind of hard to kind of quantify value of SEO, that yes, you put the work in at the beginning, but you're going to get the rewards later. But even later, when you do get the rewards, you've kind of almost earned this this kind of steady flow of customers afterwards. So it's kind of, it takes a bit longer to get right, but it's the rewards, I think, are kind of bigger. And also it's not an advert. And I think people, when they click on an advert and they know it's an advert, they respond a little bit differently. And if in some cases, that's what people want. They want to buy a product, they see an advert, they're very happy to click on it. But I think when it's not an advert, more people click on the SEO results compared to Google ads. And it's because they know that those results, they've kind of earned the right to be there. And that's kind of why I think SEO works well.
So you, in your, I'm imagining in your pitch documents, your pitch deck, that you don't promise, you don't sort of talk about the results in that sense. Obviously you can't promise someone's going to be because you must have people asking you that. Can you get me on the first page of Google? How do you just explain basically what you've just explained to me in response, or do you ever talk about the likely results of your work?
Well, Google's, if you read through some of like Google's FAQs around SEO, they say no one should be guaranteeing results. It's something that Google doesn't recommend, and you can't really, because you don't know the resources that a competitor or several competitors are going to put into the area. But I think you can, with SEO, you can evolve and adapt. So if you're finding that your target keywords are really competitive and they're taking longer to rank for, then, there's the long tail keywords, the more specific keywords that account for 70% of the overall search traffic. And you can kind of evolve and adapt your strategy. So yeah, in a pitch, it would be like, look, SEO does take time. It depends on where you're starting from. If you're starting from scratch and it's in a really, really competitive industry and you've got a very modest budget in terms of what you're prepared to spend in terms of content and someone looking after the content and optimizing it, maybe that's not a good thing to do, to spend money on SEO, because it's such a competitive industry and you've got a very small budget. But, if you do have the time and resources, and maybe you're starting from a base level where, you're on the second and third page for a kind of mid-range competitive industry, that's kind of, as an SEO, you're kind of licking your lips a little bit thinking, I know that they're not very far away from actually this making a big difference. And there's a tipping point when you start to get onto the first page of Google, and then secondly, when you're in the top half of the first page of Google. And it's kind of like, up until that point, it kind of feels like I've put a lot of work in, but I'm not really seeing a huge amount of results.
And what is that difference, if you could just very quickly quantify it, just very, very roughly?
What's the difference?
Between being not on the first page, bottom of the first page, top of the first page?
Yeah, like I would say, not on the first page. It's like if it was a stream, it would be like a trickle coming out of a rock. You'd barely be able to wash your face with the water. Okay. If you're on the second page of Google, like maybe the second half, you can wash. It's a decent stream coming out. You're not going to drown yourself in it or anything like that. But it's a decent flow, and you're getting a sense of this is starting to work. And then as you're on the top half, it's quite a powerful. Stream. If it was a vertical stream, you could probably shower in it, that type of thing.
It's good to see it through that lens of personal evolutions. But but very roughly, you're going to get twice as much traffic in position 1 compared to 2. Wow. And it is significant, the jumps, the higher you get at the top. And it's not to say that you need to be in position 1. I think when someone's serious, it depends on the product, but when someone's serious on a product and particularly if they're spending a bit of money, they're gonna do a bit of research. So it's not all about being number 1, but at the same time, it's having that appreciation that don't get one of my kind of keys is, if you're just starting out and you haven't got too much progress,
SEO experts will say it's all about tracking conversions, it's all about tracking sales, tracking website traffic. And these are important things, but more when you're established in your SEO. But I would say initially track keywords because it shows progress. You might be moving from page 6 to page 5, maybe 65.
Just 50. To see that sort of,
direction of movement. It's giving you a pat on the back that you are making progress, things are moving in the right direction, and you are, you're near that waterfall or that stream. You're not too far away from it actually starting to work. And I don't think there's that many areas of digital marketing where you put a lot of effort in and you have to wait for the tipping point. Like with social media, organically, there's an element of that, I would say. Yeah. But it's just one of those things to be aware of. You need to be in the game to start with, and start before you feel ready. But just keep the faith and keep pushing, pushing through the steps that you should be doing.
Thanks, that's good. Well, I'm aware our time is coming to a close. Actually, we're sort of the hour is almost upon us, and there's two things I really want to ask you. One of them is I want to know what tools you use in your work, because I think people will be really interested in that. But firstly, I want to ask you about your personal experience in SEO when you changed the name of your business. You blogged about it. I found that blog really fascinating. And I think, and so many businesses do change a major element of their business or their name, and I think just gives us a really interesting window into how SEO actually works. So tell us what happened with your name change.
Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't actually a name change; it was actually several, and this is the bigger part of the problem. But essentially, when you think about SEO, you want to rank a web page. Sometimes, usually a collection of web pages. But the way it works from a search engine perspective is the URL is where a search engine will build up history and trust. So that's pretty much everything you do. So all the technical stuff you do, all the content stuff you do, all the links you build to your site, it's all coming down to trust for a particular URL. And there are things you can do to improve the trust and to decrease the trust. And even if it's just a web page on your website, if you do a 301 redirect, now in theory, all that trust, or a very large percentage of that trust, gets passed over. And when I first moved domains, that's kind of what happened. At the time, my website was ranking number 1 for SEO training in the UK. And I did the redirects. I was very thorough in how they were carried out. Moved to zenoptimize.com, and it maintained the rankings almost perfectly. Wow. Slight wobble for a week or two.
You must have been quite anxious during that time.
I was quite anxious, but I had done a fair few domain migrations for clients, and they'd worked out pretty well. And it was kind of at that stage where I had like a more SEO focused domain name, and it was kind of like SEO was becoming less cool, like content marketing was the new thing, and I kind of felt like I didn't want to pinpoint myself down to Zen Optimize, and my offering became a little bit broader in terms of what I offered, so it made sense to me at the time to change. And then I think that was maybe for about 4 years I had zenoptimize.com. Then I moved to learnSEOfast.com, and then I moved to tribeseo.com. And what happens is the more time you change a URL, or in this case a domain, there's a bigger chance of that history and trust that you've built up getting lost.
And does that happen? You said most of that authority or reputation gets passed on. Is it that it gets chipped away out with each move, or can you actually literally lose the lot in a move?
Well, I kind of did lose the lot in my last 2 moves. So with Learn SEO Fast, I actually think from when I moved from Zen Optimize, it was fluctuating number 1 to number 3 for a keyword like SEO training, and then within a week it just went completely. Wasn't in the top 100, whereas previously when I moved to Zen Optimize, I remember there was a time where I was number 1 for Zen Optimize and number 2 for my previous domain. I was like, hey, I've got 2 listings here. This is great. And then I just stayed number 1, which was cool. Whereas in this case, it took me 8 months to get back to the first page of Google for the term SEO training. And it's kind of a little bit, with that in mind, like to change your domain name again, it doesn't sound like a sensible thing to do. But I really didn't feel like it sounded right. Learn SEO fast. In fact, that's the name of my course now.
Yes.
But it's not. It isn't what I wanted my brand to be. So I changed again, and I kind of felt like, worst case scenario, it's going to be similar to what happened before, and I can work with that. But it was harsher. So it's taking longer to kind of get to where I was previously. And I actually managed to speak to, it's quite not always that easy to do this, but I spoke to somebody at Google who kind of gave me their thoughts of what had happened. And it was to do, I forget the word that he used, but it was basically to do with historical baggage of the previous domain. So Tribe SEO was a park domain for a number of years. It was on an auction website. I did my research. I didn't have any bad links pointing to it. So I thought, this looks a pretty neutral domain. In theory, it should be the same. But I think it's two things. One, there was baggage with the domain that Google had, some history. And two, I think it was to do with the chain of redirects. So in the space of 4 or 5 years, I had changed my brand 4 times. And each time I'd lost some history. Yeah. So I think, my kind of tip really is, there's always a risk with any kind of redirect.
It's like moving into a house and there being a really bad credit history hanging over the house, isn't it?
Yeah. Moving domain is like moving a house in many ways. It's quite stressful. It's you don't quite know how things are going to be, but I think you have to do it for the right reasons. I think I'm happy with my decision, but it hasn't quite worked out as quickly as I would like. But just my word of advice would be minimize brand changes. Make sure you definitely are happy with what you want to change to, and also just minimize redirects as well. Like if you've got a page that's ranking really, really well, and you don't like the URL, you don't think it's perfect, but it's pretty good, I stick with it totally, 100%. And if you do change it, say to yourself, if I change it now, am I happy with it? Because you don't want to keep changing. You don't want to be losing history and trust. And I don't think that's really talked about that much in SEO circles, but that's something to kind of to bear in mind.
And just on that kind of, I guess the sort of the opposite side from optimization, the kind of falling foul bit. I hear about Google penalties and kind of bad SEO. Is there such a thing? Are there things that you can do that can absolutely destroy your ranking, and what are they? Because I want to avoid them.
Yeah, well, I mean, when we think of like content, technical, and links, there's people specialize in technical SEO, but the reality is you've only kind of got a few positive ranking signals from technical, but it's more about minimizing issues. So, if your website is throwing up lots of 404s, if it's hard for search engines to crawl your content, then you may struggle in terms of rankings, but they're not penalties. Those are almost like self-inflicting issues. In terms of penalties, Google is kind of a bit coy with using the word penalty. It's kind of like, is there such a thing as a search engine penalty, or have you just been demoted? Google's fallen out of love with your website a little. Now, I believe there are penalties. But, one thing that could get you into trouble quite fast is, paying for links. If you pay a blogger to link to your site with a keyword that you want to rank for as the anchor text, so the words in the link, that's against Google's guidelines. And, I've seen people who have done that in excess, and it has had a big impact on their rankings. In one case, I've seen that they didn't even rank for their own brand name. That's really excessive. But, at the same time, there's question marks around whether negative SEO is actually a thing. And negative SEO is where someone might build bad backlinks to your site, which look paid, probably are paid, could be from some dodgy industries like gambling or that type of thing. Well, I'm not saying gambling's that dodgy an industry, but
adult content,
adult content as well.
Sorry, you're saying that you might a competitor might do that to someone?
Yeah, like it's actually doesn't cost that much money. You could probably pay someone on Fiverr, $25, and they will throw 1,000 bad links at your website, and that's called negative SEO. And there's been a lot of tests out there in the SEO world, which sort of says it doesn't really work, and that it isn't conclusive that it works. But at the same time, it is conclusive that people have had penalties for building paid links and bad links. So I think what tends to happen is if it's something like Fiverr, maybe Google can work out that these are all really low quality backlinks, and it's getting the vibe that this what wouldn't have been done intentionally, or if it did, it was very amateurish.
Yeah.
But if you were sort of going for much more premium, authoritative and relevant sites, and it looked like you had paid for the links and you were putting in the keywords you wanted to rank for, that's a bit more easier for Google to work out that actually we think you have been bending the rules a little bit here. So I think generally, in terms of doing bad SEO, you rarely do it by accident. The accidents tend to be more the technical side of things you may have got wrong. You might have blocked search engines from accessing your content, but when it comes to content and links, you kind of know if you're doing the bad stuff. You could kind of sense, if there was a Google engineer sitting next to me right now, would I do this? And you would know the answer without knowing a huge amount of exactly how Google works.
And just for anyone's info, if you do have bad links pointing to your site, there is a way to disavow those links, isn't there, with Google?
Yeah, so in Google Search Console, you can disavow the links, which basically means telling Google to discount or discredit those links. Now, it can be a really laborious problem if you are getting, some people are getting like thousands of new bad backlinks, a month, and they might think it's from negative attacks. Or sometimes just when you have a big website, you get these crawler websites that start to crawl your content. Sometimes they'll link to your content, and it can be quite a big thing to disavow all these links, and then you start questioning whether you should disavow some of your important links actually, which should, because you're getting a little bit desperate. But
I mean, I've had that, in SEMrush, links from Pinterest and all its international different domains get flagged as potentially worth disavowing, and I'm always very on the fence about whether to actually submit links for disavowing. I don't really know if it's going to do any good, so I've sort of left it.
My general feedback, Google has said like now it discounts bad links, but there's a sort of fuzzy area against, well, does that mean you can just buy loads of links? But my take on it is, I mean, I don't think I've disavowed any links on my own site, even though I might have used a tool like SEMrush, which has flagged a couple of questionable ones. I think people generally start disavowing links if they think they've got a search engine penalty that's related to their backlinks. That's predominantly when people start to do it. As a general housekeeping thing, if your website's doing okay, it doesn't hurt to keep an eye on it in case there are some kind of adult sites or things like that. But if it's something like Pinterest, for me, that's a total neutral link. It in some cases it might be a positive link. So yeah, I think just taking a common sense approach.
That's good to know. Thanks. That's useful. Helps me out. It's not one less thing to worry about, I think. Okay. So and finally, I'd love to know. I've dabbled with things like SEMrush, Screaming Frog, and that kind of thing. Tell me what your kind of core tool set is that you call upon regularly.
Okay, well, I always have a subscription to Screaming Frog SEO Spider, and for people that don't know, it's really for technical SEO predominantly. So it crawls your website in a similar way to how a search engine would, and it reports all the URLs and it starts giving you information about those URLs. It's easy to see if you've got page errors on your site. You can even start to see how the web page is internally linked together through, I can't remember if it's called inlinks. I think it might be called inlinks in another tool, but it gives you an idea of how the pages are connected. I don't think every, and I think they've got a free tool for up to 500 URLs. So if your website isn't particularly big, or even if it is a big site, you can get a flavor of how it works. Predominantly, I use that for audits. So if I'm doing work for a client, that's one of the first things I would do. Or if maybe I was working in-house, it's something that I would maybe do at the beginning and maybe periodically. It's not a tool I would use that often, going forwards. So that's a good tool. Google Search Console, sometimes underlooked, strangely, but it offers a lot of good features in there. Partly technical, partly to do with content.
I think that update they did a year ago or earlier this year, I can't remember when. I thought it was fantastic. Shows you your impressions and clicks and click-through rates on search results pages in a really nice interface.
Yeah, I think that data has been around for a while, but with the new interface, which was about a year ago or so, they've pushed it more. So yeah, it's great for showing you sort of low-hanging fruit. So if you've got, maybe you've got your ranking for keywords on page 2 that you don't know about, and you can kind of ask yourself, can I improve the optimization for those pages? So yeah, definitely Google Search Console. The only other thing that I would want to add is you've kind of got these all-in-one SEO tools like SEMrush, Ahrefs, Moz, and I think for some people, you kind of need to have those tools. If you're at an agency or if you're in a decent sized company, I'd probably recommend having a monthly subscription to those tools. But I think for a lot of smaller businesses, even freelancers, they don't always need to have those tools on a month-to-month basis, and they'll help with backlink analysis, they'll help with keyword research, and they'll help with lots of other things in SEO. But quite often you can sort of turn them on and off when you need them. So rather than pay for a whole annual subscription, you might use it 2 or 3 times per year if you're a smaller business. But the one tool that I would recommend, if you do have some budget, is just to have like to know what keywords you want to rank for and to actually track those keywords, particularly, if you're at those early stages where you haven't got that much SEO progress. So if you are using an all-in-one SEO tool, they pretty much all do the keyword ranking tracking for you. So you're sort of safe there. But it may be if you haven't quite got the budget, or maybe you've got smaller resources, you might just want to go for a keyword specialist software. So I use AccuRanker. That's kind of more of the premium range. Or you could use something like Wincher or Rank Tracker, and they're a little bit cheaper. So yeah, lots of great tools out there. The one thing that I would say with tools is it's not going to do your SEO for you. And a lot of these SEO, I really like SEMrush, Moz, and Ahrefs, but even those aren't always perfect in some of the recommendations that they suggest. And some of the SERP Stats, another good all-in-one tool, but some of the lower price tools are actually, in my opinion, are more confusing than they are helpful. So they'll say something like, your title tag is 72 characters, which is 2 characters, over the recommended amount. Here's a big cross for you, and it's kind of like, yes, there are limits here to kind of obey, but when you end up with 400 crosses, it's hard to see the wood from the trees sort of thing.
Yeah, that's the thing I would say about all these tools. It's the same with social management, social listing tools, any sort of analysis tool. You need an intelligent human sat in front of it to actually get something out of it. And they do, I think their home pages and their landing pages do sometimes give the impression that they do the work for you, do the SEO for you, but I would definitely agree that's not the case.
Yeah, and it's not, we all like, inbox zero, but it's not all about, as much, some issues are more important, but it's not about getting rid of all the issues that the tool reports, because it would have to be extremely sophisticated to be able to prioritize what things you should spend more time on, what things you shouldn't. Even Google and Google Search Console, like some of the issues it reports aren't really issues, but it's you've got to kind of interpret that a little bit yourself. But it's I would say you want to lead with your own SEO strategy first, and use these tools as a sort of complementary. If you're doing backlink analysis, you definitely need to use a tool. If you're doing keyword research, you pretty much need to use a tool to help you do that. But in terms of some of the technical side of things, that's where it gets a little bit more grey in terms of, that's why I quite like Screaming Frog SEO Spider. It rather than tell you what's wrong or right, you have to look at it and interpret it. Yeah. Whereas a lot of these other tools are trying to tell you whether it's right or wrong, when in fact the tool itself sometimes finds it hard to interpret whether it's right or wrong.
What you really need is an SEO expert. That's what you really need to call, isn't it? So, and that's you. So tell us where, just to cap off, tell us where people can find you and find out about you. Where are you on the web and in social?
Yeah, so the website is tribeseo.com. We provide online SEO training courses. I'm on LinkedIn. I think it's linkedin.com/in/Joseph Williams.
That's the one.
On Twitter, I'm Joe the SEO. But yeah, that's kind of, the moving from London to Wales. The focus now is on online SEO training rather than in-person SEO training. So right now, we've got a beta course, but that. So
can people enroll in that?
If they contact me through through LinkedIn or through my website, then I can kind of I can introduce you to the course that way. So people are using it and testing it, but it's maybe a month or two away from it being obviously, I'm selling it to the public. Yeah. But
cool. Well, good luck with that, and thanks so much for all your insights and experience and expertise and nuggets of very, very valuable information there. Thanks, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it, Will. So thanks for the opportunity.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information about transforming your marketing career through certified online training, head to digitalmarketinginstitute.com. Thanks for listening.